Hey everyone, I'm Chris Galati.
And I'm John Hildebrand.
And today we're going to talk to you about a concept known as air gapping. Now, NIST has some definitions and we're seeing a lot of this out in the marketplace. We want to give a little bit of an illustration around how Cohesity is handling this. But John, before we get started, I mean, really, by definition, can most people really get a true air gap anymore?
No, not unless you do this. Pretty much have to cut the cord these days to go with the definition of air gapping.
But that's not realistic, right? I mean, we have to keep things connected. I think there's some creative things that can be done around physical interfaces, virtual interfaces, networking routes and firewall rules. But realistically, to meet that definition, I think you and I both know it's pretty hard, right?
Yeah, well, it's probably more on the line of impossible to consider thinking that these days.
So why don't you take us through the first part of this, which is talking a little bit about, what customers can get today based on their risk level and tolerance and things like that.
So as you can see here, we have our data center with our Cohesity software deployed. And we have to start here first with the air gap discussion before we can start to worry about the other portions of how we make copies elsewhere. So to begin with, because we have a lot of problems these days with the data center and the fact that they're constantly under attack. Ransomware and malware are constantly being thrown at our data centers. So we have to start off with protecting the data center first before we can truly start talking about air gapping a solution. So the first thing and the most important thing is to have the immutable snapshots. So you have to have these so that they cannot be adjusted in any way, shape, or form by outside forces. Then you have to have some worm capability. So that's where data lock comes into play. So worm, write once, read many, allows for us to make multiple copies of these particular snapshots without adjusting the data within so that we can make the changes necessary for future snapshots down the road. And last but not least, from a NIST perspective, recovery is awfully important. You have to be able to recover from one of these particular events should they happen. And then that's where the instant recovery comes into play. Being able to do near zero time on recovering any of, whether it's a virtual machine or databases that we have within our data center, to allow for us to bring those back as quickly as possible.
Now, we've got other things in there too that we don't want to gloss over. We just haven't illustrated them, but they're kind of table stakes, right? When we talk about things like single sign-on, two-factor authentication, those are still important as well, right?
Yeah, and you are talking about who has access to the data, how they access the data, and ensuring that happens. So role-based access control is awfully important, as well as some of the other factors that you just mentioned.
So what comes next? Let's talk a little bit about where this transitions to the other side of this board, with SLAs and how that kind of wraps together. And let's talk a little bit about this air gap we have here in the middle.
Well, now if you think about it, this is a single data center location or a data center ring of some architecture that we have out there. There are other factors that could potentially take all of this out. Mm-hmm. So where is the data going to exist? I mean, we talk about natural disasters. We talk about some man-made or malicious internal intent that could potentially cause
just human error.
Yeah, just plain old human error can come into play where in this data center then becomes unusable. So that's where we have to worry about an air-gapped copy somewhere else that exists, whether it's in multiple different locations, multiple different formats. We have to have something as that, essentially that last copy in the event that we're down to this does not exist or is unusable.
Well, and this is where we get into that defense in depth conversation, right?
Yes.
You and I have talked about this a lot, where having the single copies here that are protected and covered is one thing, but then getting them out to these other areas. And what we want to talk about here is how this relates to SLAs, right? And I think what we've done is we've drawn this from the top down as far as the fastest SLA to the slowest, right? So let's kind of walk through this, and I'll inject some things here as we go. So first and foremost, we can do replication, right? So we can replicate instantly from the data center Cohesity product out to another one, which could be in another physical data center. It could be a virtual edition. It could be a cloud-based edition. We run a software, so it could be anywhere. Mm-hmm. So that gives us one copy that's very quickly accessible, still recoverable, that we own, the format.
Yeah, exactly. Everything's already in the exact format. It's already nice and compact and ready and easily available to recover from.
Right. So that'd be kind of your first and quickest line of defense. Right. So as we move down the stack, we can also do some archiving. So we don't talk about this a lot, but let's touch on it. We can archive to a NAS target. So if somebody has an existing on-prem NAS device, we can even archive to that, right?
Well, and even on top of it, you have to figure there are some NAS solutions that exist within public cloud in those particular formats.
Yep.
Like SMB or NFS in some
Correct.
particular capacity.
So it doesn't have to be on-prem.
So it doesn't have to necessarily be directly on-prem or within your data center ring. This could exist just about anywhere as long as you have the networking pipe connected
Yep.
to it.
So moving down the stack, we can do traditional archive to cloud, and we support all the major clouds and all the major protocols, right? So we have S3, we can do Blob, we can do GCP. So it doesn't really matter which cloud you're going to, but the separation between what we talked about here is this could be a cloud-based NAS format, but this is true cloud storage, correct?
Correct, yeah. And you even mentioned S3, but there's the S3 compatible services that are available out there. You're not necessarily talking about a specific cloud in this particular case. There's plenty of other offerings that exist out in the cloud that are compatible with that particular
Right.
format that we can communicate with.
And I think this is still interesting because folks watching this may not realize that we can still do tape out, correct?
Correct, yeah. For those, the tried and true, what you would consider the most traditional of the Airgap solutions, we can still do tape out, and you can send them off to your favorite vaulting service that you have out there and have those available and brought back to you in the event that something happens with this primary data center.
And that, to me, that what that really gives us is 1, 2, and 3 are sort of a virtual air gap, if you want to put it that way. 4 is still fairly physical because you can send those tapes off to a vault somewhere.
Yeah, and even if you go by the definition that NIST has about some of those virtual air gapping capabilities, they tend not to like to use automation, or you have to do some form.
It's manual intervention, I think, when we read it, right?
Yeah, there's quite a bit of manual intervention. And each one of these, of the replication, the NAS target, and the archive to cloud, those can all be set up in a manual fashion as well as some of the traditional automated capabilities to it. But if you wanted to stick closer to that NIST definition, you could make these more of a manual process as well, and even get to some particular points of severing that network connection as soon as the data is transferred over.
Right. So last, let's just hit real quick sort of the benefits of each of these that we touched on. The replication, major benefit, it's quick, it's our format, it's another Cohesity appliance, easily brought back up online.
But all the benefits of the Cohesity system that we've talked about in plenty of other videos, whether the small format, as much data squeezed out of it as possible, it's going to be the quickest to recover from.
And I think let's focus on NAS being local. If you have an archive copy on a local NAS, you still have fairly decent recovery time. We've still got to bring it back off the NAS, but it's still localized, right? These two solutions ideally would be within a local network somewhere. So the benefit here is low-cost storage, easily accessible, things like that, right? And as we move down through cloud solutions, that's where we start to hit a little bit of download time. We've got to bring it back from internet speeds are going to vary, right? So your mileage is going to vary, obviously.
Yes.
And clearly, the benefit of tape is truly gone offsite, physically separated, but the trade-off is you got to bring that stuff back from a vault somewhere.
Yeah, and not only that, having the equipment available and making sure that the software that works with it is going to bring everything back the way that it's supposed to.
Brings back some bad memories.
Yes, it
tape
does.
restores. So hopefully that helps everybody understand where Cohesity plays in Airgap solutions and kind of how we look at this whole process.